Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about historical fiction novels in verse. Novels in verse are not typically very sought after by teens, but this format has been a growing trend in young adult fiction for some time. Novels such as these can be great to recommend to reluctant readers or to teens pressed for time. They are usually unintimidating due to the spacing of the text, which often also makes them pretty quick reads. Novels in verse can take many different forms, from strictly formatted poetry to free verse poetry. Novels in verse are read and experienced in a very different way from traditional prose novels due to the added visual dimensions of style and formatting. The novels I'll be telling you about today are arranged in roughly chronological order, beginning with one set in the 1690s and ending with one set in the 1970s. Each has a different style and narrative format, but all were thoroughly enjoyable. The first book I'll be telling you about is Wicked Girls by Stephanie Hemphill. This is the story of the Salem witch trials as told from the perspectives of the girls who were accusing their neighbors as witches. Mercy Lewis, Margaret Walcott, Anne Putnam Jr., Betty Paris, Abigail Williams, Elizabeth Hubbard, and Susanna Sheldon are the narrators of this novel. The author has taken some license with the characters' names in order to avoid confusion, something she explains in the notes following the story. Margaret is based upon the true character of Mary Walcott, and Elizabeth Hubbard was known as Betty in her lifetime. Although many of us have some familiarity with the story of what happened in Salem in 1692, rarely is the story told by the teenaged girls who were at the center of the controversy. This novel allows readers to explore the group dynamics and conflicting feelings of the young women who played such a large part in a rather disgraceful chapter of our nation's early history. Who were the ringleaders, and who wanted to leave the group? Were the girls cruelly tormented within the company of witches? How did they know who to accuse? What happened to the girls after the trials ended? If you've ever wondered about any of these questions or would like to learn more about the witch trials themselves, Wicked Girls may be the book for you. The next novel we'll be talking about is Crossing Stones by Helen Frost. This novel is framed by the experiences of two neighboring families in rural Michigan during World War I. The Jorgensen family consists of Mama, Papa, 18-year-old Muriel, 16-year-old Ollie, and 7-year-old Grace. Just across Crabapple Creek are their close friends and neighbors, the Normans. Mother, father, 18-year-old Frank, and 17-year-old Emma. The four older children have always been together and have grown up together, but this dynamic is changed when Frank enlists in the army. Each member of both families eagerly await his letters home and pray for his safe return, as life at home continues almost as normal. When Frank is granted leave following basic training and before being shipped to France, he and Muriel begin to realize that maybe they could be more than just friends. Muriel is a rather progressive thinker for her age, and does become a member of the suffragette movement. She doesn't want to be tied down to him as he's away at the war, a war she does not entirely agree with. He does manage to steal a kiss before boarding his train, and their relationship does begin to grow as they exchange letters. Ollie, at 16, is too young to enlist when war is declared, but decides to do so anyway by lying about his age. His family is unable to do anything about this after the fact, for fear of risking dishonorable discharge, something that could follow him his entire life. As the girls left at home try to help ease the burden on their parents, they mature into thoughtful young women. The narrative viewpoint of this novel shifts between Muriel, Emma, and Ollie. Readers get to know Frank through his letters home. The author uses the forms of her poems to mimic the flowing of water and the stones it flows around, and the changes in format reflect the personality of each character. Will the young men return from the war? How does the war affect their relationships with the people closest to them? Will Frank and Muriel live happily ever after? Will Emma and Ollie end up together as well? This was a very engrossing book that personalizes World War I for readers. I highly recommend it. Our next book is Ringside 1925 by Jen Bryant. This is a novel about the Scopes monkey trial, which brings readers into the town of Dayton, Tennessee, where the famous trial was held. Many young adults have read Inherit the Wind, the play based upon the Scopes trial, in English class, but for many this is the only way they've learned a story about this trial. This novel takes you into the small, and growing ever smaller, town where the trial took place and introduces the reader to the residents of the town. Narrators include several high school students, a young African American boy, the local law enforcement, the proprietor of a local boarding house, a member of the Bible study group, and a young reporter sent down from St. Louis to cover the trial. This is a work of historical fiction that entices the reader to read on and learn more. From this novel, readers begin to understand why the trial took place, who the major players were, how the trial played out, and what effects were had on the community. The story is told very effectively through the eyes of the normal citizens of Dayton, people who readers will have no trouble relating to. The next book is Cold Skin. This is set in the small town of Barooga, Australia, following World War II. Many of the men in town went off to fight in the war. Some saw more action than others, and 16 never returned home. Most of the men left small children at home with their wives when they went off to fight. When they returned, those children were elementary school age, but had now grown into high school age, and most of the story is told from their perspective. Eddie and Larry are the teenage sons of Albert Holding. Eddie wants to leave school and go to work in the mines, but his father doesn't want any son of his going underground. Eddie has a growing relationship with his good friend Sally Holmes. Eddie's younger brother Larry is just biding his time until he finishes school and can leave town. Their teacher, Mr. Butcher, is not particularly fond of either boy, but he's not very fond of teaching or Barooga either. Albert Holding has long carried a chip on his shoulder about his military service since the war. He strongly dislikes Mayor Paley, who received a medical dispensation and did not serve. The story really begins when a teenaged girl, a classmate of the Holding boys, is found dead by the railroad tracks. Every man in town is a suspect. Who has the most to hide? How do the lingering effects of the war affect the dynamics of the town? Who killed her and why? This novel will keep readers guessing until the final pages. I would recommend this title to mystery lovers. The final novel I'm going to talk about is All the Broken Pieces by Anne Burr. This novel in verse is a bit different from the ones that we learned about earlier, in that it is only told through one point of view. Narrator Matt Penn is a 7th grade boy who likes to play baseball and is learning to play the piano. He is also half American and half Vietnamese and was adopted 3 years ago after being airlifted out of war-torn Vietnam. His birth father was an American soldier whom he never had the chance to meet. His mother knew that he would have a better chance at life in America. Now Matt is trying to figure out where he fits in with his new family and in his new community. There is still a measure of anger over the young men who left to fight in Vietnam and did not come home, or who came home changed physically or mentally. Some of that anger is directed at Matt as a visible reminder of the losses suffered. Matt's adopted family is trying hard to make his transition easier. They have a biological son of their own, a toddler named Tommy. They attend Vietnamese cultural celebrations offered through the adoption agency and make an effort to help Matt learn about and maintain his Vietnamese heritage. They also encourage his interests in baseball and music. Making the baseball team is a way to help achieve a sense of normalcy, but teammate Rob Brennan lost his brother in Vietnam and takes his hurt and anger out on Matt. Matt's piano teacher is a Vietnam veteran who comes to Matt's parents with the idea of having Matt attend a meeting of Vietnam Voices, a local support group for veterans. He thinks that meeting Matt may help some of these men realize that they did make a positive difference, and that some good has come out of what is now a very unpopular war. Matt's parents think it may help Matt to get to know some of these men who shared some experiences during the war. Will Rob and Matt ever find a common ground? Does the veterans group bring peace to any of the attendees? How does Matt learn to cope with his feelings and memories? This novel teaches readers about an aspect of fairly recent history that not many teens are familiar with. It is an emotionally complex story that will keep even reluctant readers engaged. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've gained some good recommendations on this somewhat unconventional format. I really enjoyed reading each of these novels, and I think your patrons will as well.